Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Hello everybody, spoiler season is back and so is Olivia. And of course, because spoiler season is back, so are these quick takes and my mass consumption of coffee. But my coffee drinking habits aside, seriously, Olivia is back and better than ever. I mean, this is quite the commander to start spoiler season off with. Now, like me, you might have been potentially disappointed in Olivia's previous iteration, but this one more than makes up for that. I mean, Olivia Mobilized for War has exactly 133 decks to its name, according to EDH Rec, and yeah, this new Olivia is probably going to pass that within, I don't know, a day or so. So what does this brand new and exciting Olivia do? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Olivia Crimson Bride is a 3/4 Vampire Noble with flying and haste that costs 4 black-red. She has, whenever she attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains, when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. So Olivia has an attack trigger that essentially lets us reanimate a creature already attacking, and yeah, that can be a very powerful thing. Now there is a limitation to this in that essentially, if Olivia dies and you don't have any other legendary vampires, well, all those creatures that you reanimated with her are gone, and I mean really gone. They're not going back to your graveyard so you can just do it again and get them back out with Olivia. No, they are exiled. So yeah, we'll talk about some ways to get around that and also talk about some other legendary vampires that you're probably going to want in this deck to make sure that you don't lose them. That being said, Olivia might only be a 3/4, but the fact that she has flying and haste is huge. When you get her down, you're pretty much guaranteed to get through on at least one opponent. Again, flying is a very effective form of evasion, and one opponent probably doesn't have a flyer to their name or a creature with reach. Or if they do have a flyer, perhaps it's just a token, maybe a 1/1, and yeah, Olivia can be fine attacking into that. Regardless, the fact that she has haste is even more important because, yeah, you can just get Olivia down and immediately reanimate something that's going to be coming in and attacking as well. So even with Olivia in your command zone, your opponents better be wary when you get something massive in your graveyard, and yeah, with these colors, we've got plenty of ways to get some fantastic things into our graveyard. Now, on these quick takes, a quick reminder that I'm going to be talking about basically how I would build around this commander and what cards I would consider. And also with these quick takes, I very well might make mistakes because these cards are just as new to me as they are to you. So I might misspeak about the commander or, you know, what cards might work around with it. And my apologies if I miss something. I am trying my hardest, I promise. But with that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into the cards that I think would work really well in an Olivia deck. First up, obviously, since you've got access to red, you've got plenty of ways to loot and wheel. So cards like Faithless Looting and Ruin Grinder are going to be great in this kind of deck. Faithless Looting has you draw 2, then discard 2, and you can flash it back to do it again, so yeah, this is a fantastic card. Again, having a massive creature in your hand that you definitely can't cast is usually a bad thing for most decks, but if you can just, loot, draw some cards, then you can discard that creature, it goes into your graveyard, and then Olivia can help you get it out. So yeah, not a bad thing at all. And then Ruin Grinder is itself a pretty big creature, a 7/4 with Menace, and yeah, when it dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards, and on top of that, this has Mountain Cycling for 2. So this card can essentially get itself into your graveyard by you paying 2 and going and getting a mountain, which, you know, is just nice, but it's also nice that this is going to be in your graveyard for Olivia to get. And then, of course, on top of that, when this does die, each player can discard their hand and draw 7 cards, so yeah, just ditch your hand, get a ton of things in your graveyard, and draw a new 7. But since you also have access to black, you've got even better ways to get specific creatures in your graveyard with things like Unmarked Grave, Final Parting, and Buried Alive. Unmarked Grave says search your library for a non-legendary card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle. And for those of you out there thinking, why didn't you just mention Entomb? I mean, it's 1 mana less, it's an instant speed, and can get you anything. Yes, I know, but that card is like 25 bucks, so okay. Regardless, a card that is much more budget-friendly, right around $1, is Final Parting. It says search your library for 2 cards, put 1 in your hand and the other in your graveyard, then shuffle. So yeah, get the perfect card for your hand and the perfect creature for your graveyard for Olivia to reanimate. Or, you know, why don't you just go get 3 perfect creatures with Buried Alive? It's gonna let you search your library for 3 creature cards, put them right into your graveyard, then shuffle your library, so yeah, this can really set up some explosive turns. And we actually have some creatures that can help us get things into our graveyard as well, with things like Violent Tumor, Corpse Connoisseur, and Auric Lore Mage. Violent Tumor has when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle. Corpse Connoisseur does the exact same thing, but it's gotta be a creature card, which again is what we're gonna wanna do anyways, and we can also unearth this to do it again. And then Auric Lore Mage is actually a repeatable tutor effect like this. We can tap it to search our library for a card and put it into our graveyard, then shuffle. So yeah, this in combination with Olivia can be absolutely devastating. And speaking of devastating, let's talk about some devastating creatures that you're going to want to get out with her, with some massive things like Vilis Broker of Blood, Sepulchral Primordial, and you know what, why not Void Winnower? Vilis Broker of Blood is an 8/8 demon with flying, and it has pay a black, pay 2 life, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Oh yeah, and on top of that, whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So this can draw you an absurd amount of cards and make sure opponents really think twice if they are going to attack you or deal any kind of damage to you. Because if they swing big at you, guess what? For every life that you lose, you're going to be drawing a card. And if they don't swing big at you, well, you can just have Vilis help you lose life on its own. But yeah, keep in mind that with all these creatures that you're getting back from your graveyard and right into play, you're also bringing them in and they're attacking. So with Vilis, that's pretty much 8 extra damage right away on top of all the other things that Vilis does. Regardless, next up, let's move on to Sepulchral Primordial, which is fantastic as well. A 5/4 with Intimidate, so yeah, usually that can get through on at least one opponent. It has, when it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So by reanimating this one creature, we get 3 more creatures, and yeah, that's a ton of value. And we'll actually talk about ways to use and abuse ETB triggers like this one here in a bit. Regardless, of course, you really can't go wrong, you know, except for potentially losing friends, when you play an Eldrazi like Void Winnower. Or again, not play, because come on, we're not going to spend 9 mana to get this out, we're just going to attack with Olivia. Regardless, Void Winnower is pretty much the definition of brutal. It's an 11/9, and that's nowhere near the reason that it's brutal. It's brutal because it says your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs, and your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. So this helps a lot of your creatures get through on a lot of things, and also makes it so your opponents can't cast probably about half their hand. Or, you know, in some cases, if you're lucky, their entire hand. So yeah, if you've got $10 and want to potentially lose some friends, look no further than Void Winnower. Moving on though, one more heavy hitter that I do want to bring up for a different reason is Rakdos the Defiler. Now, Rakdos actually doesn't see a lot of play because although it is a heavy hitter, it has a massive downside. It's a 7/6 with Flample, which in other words is flying and trample in case you're not into the magic lingo. Regardless, it says when it attacks, sacrifice half the non-demon permanents you control rounded up. So yeah, that is a massive downside. But its upside says whenever it deals common damage to a player, that player sacrifices half the non-demon permanents they control rounded up. Now the reason that I'm actually telling you to most definitely consider this card for an Olivia deck is, well, you can get around that attack trigger. Again, Olivia reads, when she attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Because of that, if you get Rakdos back from your graveyard and you put it into play tapped and attacking, well, its attack trigger is not going to go off. Basically, because it's already attacking, it has not attacked. It's kind of a weird thing, okay? You get around it. So therefore, you're not sacrificing any of your permanents when you do this, and if this hits an opponent, well, they sacrifice a ton of things. So, yeah, I guess I should say that if you think Void Winnower is brutal, this might be even more brutal in this kind of a deck. Regardless, make sure you're on the lookout for these other kind of niche cards that, well, might not work well in a lot of decks, but will work really well because Olivia can help you get around attack triggers. And speaking of attack triggers, you're really going to want to abuse Olivia's attack trigger with extra combat spells. For example, Relentless Assault says, untap all creatures that attack this turn after this main phase, their combat phase, followed by additional main phase. Or in layman's terms, hey, you get an extra combat. Or for Gruul players out there, swing again. But yeah, doubling up on Olivia's attack trigger can be incredibly impactful. Even without anything else on the board other than Olivia, you attack, you get a massive creature out of your graveyard tapped and attacking, you dish out damage. You cast this, you get to swing again, get another massive creature out of your graveyard, and now you're swinging with 3 creatures. So you just reanimated 2 creatures in a turn and dished out a ton of damage thanks to this 4-mana spell. And of course, we've got other additional combat spells that can really help us out with things like Morog, Breath of Fury, and Port Razor. Morog Fear of Akum says, each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it is attacked this turn. More importantly though, it also has landfall whenever land enters the battlefield under your control. If it's your main phase, the initial combat phase after this phase, at the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. Basically, landfall, extra combats, have fun. And speaking of having fun, and again, my apologies if in this quick take I make any mistakes, but I believe you can just pretty easily go infinite with things like Breath of Fury and Port Razor. Breath of Fury says, enchant creature you control. Whenever enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, the initial combat phase. Essentially, all you need to do is have a creature in play other than Olivia that you can guarantee that you're going to be able to get through with, and also having a creature in your graveyard that pretty much has the exact same requirement. So again, if you've got a flyer or something with Intimidate, or, Void Winnower that makes things not be able to block, those can usually work. Regardless, you attack with a creature that has Breath of Fury on it, as well as Olivia. You get Olivia's trigger to get another creature out of your graveyard, then you deal your damage, then Breath of Fury triggers, you sacrifice the creature that hit, you put the Breath of Fury on that other creature that you just got out of your graveyard, and then you get another combat, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and again, and again, and again. So yeah, I can see Breath of Fury's price potentially going up just a bit. And with a little setup, you can also go infinite with Port Razor. It's a 4/4 Orc Pirate that has, when it deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, the initial combat phase, Port Razor can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. Now that might seem like a, hey, you can't do this kind of restriction, but of course, there are ways around that. Like a sacrifice outlet like Goblin Bombardment, which, yes, is now budget under $1, thank you reprints. It has sacrifice a creature, Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. So if you can guarantee that you can get through with your Port Razor, again, if you destroy your opponent's creatures, or tap them down, or make it unblockable, etc, 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 well, then you get that combat damage through, you're getting an extra combat, you sacrifice the Port Razor to the Goblin Bombardment, you ping something for 1, maybe an opponent's face, and then you know what? Port Razor's in your graveyard. Then you attack with Olivia, you get it out of your graveyard, and now it's a new Port Razor, and it's already attacking anyways, and attack whoever you want. Or at least I should say, attack who Port Razor can get through on, so you can do it again, and again, and again. But speaking of sacrifice outlets, you're also going to want to include those in this deck again to get around that exiling effect that happens if you happen to lose your legendary vampires. Because, yeah, if you can, you definitely want to avoid permanently losing your creatures just for losing your vampires. And actually, in combination with a sacrifice outlet like Goblin Bombardment, something like Malakir Rebirth is incredible in this deck. It says choose target creature, you lose 2 life until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So yeah, if your legendary vampire is about to go away, or you want to make sure that you keep a big creature around pretty much forever, well, until it gets removed, you basically cast Malakir Rebirth, targeting that big creature, you sacrifice it, and it's going to come back into play as a new permanent, so yeah, it doesn't have that text that Olivia gave it. So at that point, then it doesn't matter if you've got a legendary vampire or not, it's going to be sticking around. But also, yeah, you're going to want to include other legendary vampires in this deck to make it easier to keep your creatures around. So things like Anya Falkenrath, Florian, and Yahenni can really come in handy. Anya Falkenrath has haste and tap, discard a card, draw a card, so yeah, that works really well with our plan already in helping us getting big creatures into our graveyard. And then Florian Valdarin Scion has a lot of text, so here we go. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile one of those cards, put the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exile card this turn. Basically, it's kind of like a repeatable mini tutor based on the amount of life that your opponents have lost. And yeah, with this deck, you can dish out a lot of pain, so you can tutor pretty far. But Yahenni is probably the best of these vampires, being a 2/2 hasty Aetherborn vampire that says whenever a creature opponent controls dies, put a counter on it, and also sacrifice another creature. Yahenni gains indestructible until end of turn. So yeah, of course, Yahenni can become a massive threat, but more importantly, it can be very hard to deal with. And yeah, when this sticks around, those reanimated creatures that you have stick around as well. Regardless, now that we've talked about what cards work really well in an Olivia deck, let's talk about what decks Olivia might want to be in the 99 of. And the first commander that came to mind that might want this brand new Olivia is Chainer Nightmare Adept. Chainer loves to discard creature cards and then cast those creature cards from your graveyard. And of course, getting great creatures into your graveyard is a great way to get even more creatures out with Olivia. So yeah, I think Olivia very well might find a spot in a Chainer deck. Next up, another commander that might want to consider Olivia is Grenzo Dungeon Warden. Grenzo's going to come into play with X counters on it, and by paying 2, you put the bottom card of your library in your graveyard. If it's a creature card with power less than equal to Grenzo's power, you put it onto the battlefield. So actually, even if you hit a creature that just happens to have less power than Grenzo, again, Olivia can help you get it back. And actually, keep in mind that Olivia only has 3 power, which again, might be a bad thing in a lot of situations, but is really good in this one. All you need is 1 counter on Grenzo to actually just, pay 2, and if Olivia's on the bottom of your library, you're getting her right into play for a ton of value. And one final commander that I'm gonna bring up, maybe you're an Olivia fan and you like Olivia. How about another Olivia in your deck? So yeah, if you've got an Olivia Voldaren deck, or the other Olivia deck, which again only has 133 total decks on EDH Rec, so statistically, you probably don't own that, but you might. Regardless, if you've got either of those Olivias and you love Olivia, consider this new Olivia. But yeah, that's my take on this brand new Olivia Crimson Pride. I think this is a really exciting commander with a very powerful reanimation effect that, again, does have a weakness to it, but there are ways around that weakness or ways that you can work with it. The fact that she has flying and haste is huge, so you can just get her out right away and get something massive out of your graveyard. And again, maybe that's something that already died, or something that you discarded in your graveyard, or you tutored for it. So yeah, you can do some massive things pretty quickly with this kind of a commander. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.